You're supposed to lose value when you discard, right? But what if I told you there's a commander that flips that rule on its head? One that turns every discarded card into massive value. Norman Osborn, also better known as the Green Goblin. He is one of the new dual-faced commanders from the Spider-Man set, and let me tell you, this card is absolutely wild. Let's start with the front side of this card, Norman Osborn. It's a 2-mana, 1/1 creature that can be blocked. Being unblockable basically guarantees that we can connect for combat damage every single turn, and when we do, we get to Connive. Meaning we get to draw a card, then discard a card, and if the discarded card is a non-land card, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Norman. And since we do play a ton of self-discard synergies in this deck, every time we swing with Norman, we get a free loot effect that will grow his body over the course of the game, and it guarantees us that we do have a really reliable source of self-discard early in the game. So if you don't have any other cards to play on turn 2, you will always have the option to cast Norman frontside up and start chipping in for damage and start the discard engine. And yes, before anyone asks, when you do decide to transform Norman into his backside, he will get to keep every single +1/+1 counter he had on himself. And a quick side note that's really important for gameplay purposes, because Norman is a modal dual-faced commander, you don't actually have to cast the front side first. You can choose to cast either side from the command zone directly, because the backside of this card also has a mana cost. So if you want to go into Green Goblin mode straight from the command zone, it's totally possible to do that. Now let's talk about the backside of this card, Green Goblin, because this is where things get really interesting. For 4 mana, you can either transform Norman or cast Green Goblin, a 3/3 flying menace body that comes with 2 insane passive abilities. First up, any spell you cast from your graveyard will cost 2 mana less. Now that might sound simple, but this ability actually scales with a ton of mechanics that allow you to cast cards from your graveyard. Flashback, Jumpstart, Retrace, Aftermath, Escape, Disturb, Harmonize, and of course the newest mechanic from the Spider-Man set, Mayhem. Which brings us directly to his second ability, which gives every non-land card in your graveyard Mayhem. If you discarded that card this turn, you can just cast it again from your graveyard by just paying its mana cost. So what does this all mean in practice? Whenever you discard something, that card isn't wasted. You can just cast it again from your graveyard that same turn, and thanks to his first ability, you're doing it for 2 mana cheaper, essentially giving us double the value. Now from the moment this card got spoiled, a ton of people immediately started brewing with it, and especially CDH players, because the combo potential of Green Goblin is absolutely off the charts. There are some disgusting combos with cards like Underworld Breach, and you can totally build Green Goblin as a combo commander. But that's not what I went for here. I decided to take a different route, something more interactive, more mid-range, and a ton more fun. This list is mainly focused on self-discard and casting cards from the graveyard. Once the engine is online, you can start chaining spells and generating value out of thin air. And here's the best part, the deck is built on a €100 budget and it doesn't use any game changer cards. Originally I started brewing it as a no budget list, but as I was fine tuning the deck, I realized that most of the cards in this deck weren't all that expensive. By trimming out the mana base and cutting some specific expensive cards, I was able to bring the budget down without losing any of its power. And honestly, if I did have more budget to work with, I wouldn't even make that many changes to this list. But no fear, if you do want to invest more into the deck, stick around, because at the end of the video I do have a small upgrade section explaining how you can push this deck even further. And before we get started, I also would like to mention that we just hit 10,000 subscribers on the channel, which is a number that still doesn't feel real to me. Later in the video I will be talking about what I'll be doing to celebrate that milestone, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But for now, let's jump straight into the list and break down Green Goblin. As per usual, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. And this video is divided up into 9 categories: the discard outlets, graveyard synergies, looting and wheels, the win conditions, acceleration, support, protection and interaction, the lands, and an upgrade section. Let's get started by talking about the discard outlets. Every great Mayhem turn in this deck starts with one thing: discarding. And these are all of our repeatable discard engines. Cards that allow us to consistently discard specific cards and get all our synergies online. Ghostly Pilferer, a 2 mana creature with a ton of abilities. And let's get started by talking about its last and most important ability. On instant speed, we can just discard a card to give this creature unblockable. Now obviously in this deck we don't really care about giving this creature unblockable, but this ability does give us a way free of any cost to just discard whatever card we want on instant speed. You can just discard cards without having to jump through any hoops. And whenever you have this creature and Green Goblin on the field, you can just discard any card from your hand and recast it for 2 mana less by using Green Goblin's Mayhem ability. Or whenever you have one of our win conditions on the table, you can just use this effect to ditch your entire hand and get a ton of discard triggers. Now honestly, if that was the only ability on this card, I'd still include it in the deck. But on top of that, it even has 2 more abilities, which are actually really good. Whenever Ghostly Pilferer becomes untapped, you get the option to pay 2 generic mana. When you do, you get to draw a card. So you can just give him unblockable, swing into an opponent, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, whenever he untaps, you just get the option to invest some mana to draw some cards. And whenever an opponent casts a card from anywhere other than their hand, we get to draw a card. This applies to opponents recasting their Gravecrawler, flashbacking a card from their graveyard, or even whenever an opponent casts their commander from the command zone. And since this is a 2-drop creature, it will come down before opponents cast their commanders, and whenever they do, you just get an insane amount of card advantage. Likeness Looter, a 2 mana 1/1 flying creature that has the classic tap to loot ability. And as you will see later in this section, we do play a ton of these creatures that allow us to tap them to loot. And that is because they are just a really consistent way of being able to discard specific cards every single turn. And on top of being a flying looting body, this creature has an additional activated ability. By paying generic mana equal to the mana cost of any creature in your graveyard, Likeness Looter will become a copy of that creature. It will retain the flying and this ability. And something really interesting is that this ability doesn't stay until the end of turn. It will just stay a copy of the selected creature until this creature either is removed or you decide to copy another creature. And in this deck, this ability is just fantastic because we do play a ton of wheel effects and we will be filling our graveyard really quickly. And if for example you discard one of your win condition creatures, it will go to your graveyard and you can copy it with Likeness Looter. Then if you also have Green Goblin on the battlefield, you can just recast that win con creature by using the Mayhem mechanic, and you will essentially have 2 copies of any of your win cons, which is just absolutely crazy and will close out games really fast. Psychic Frog, the best discard outlet they ever printed. Change my mind. Like with Ghostly Pilferer, this card has an ability where we can just discard any card on instant speed to put a +1/+1 counter on Psychic Frog. Fantastic unconditional discard outlet that will also turn this little frogger into a really huge creature body. And whenever this little froggo deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to draw a card, an excellent source of card advantage. And if you don't like creatures without evasion that rely on dealing combat damage, this is where the third ability comes in. We can exile 3 cards from our graveyard to give this creature flying until the end of turn, basically guaranteeing us a trigger on its first ability. And since we do play a ton of loot and wheel effects, we will always have a huge amount of cards in our graveyard to actually exile. Rona, Herald of Invasion, a 2 mana tap to loot creature that has an ability that allows us to use it multiple times in a single turn. Because whenever you cast a legendary spell, you get to untap this creature and basically get another use out of it. Because whenever you have this creature on the battlefield, you can just tap to loot, then you can just cast Green Goblin, which is a legendary spell, and you will get to untap Rona. And Green Goblin will then even give Mayhem to the card you discarded before Green Goblin was even on the battlefield, because he just gives Mayhem to everything in your graveyard and he doesn't even care that he didn't see you discarding the card. Rona is just one of the best loot creatures ever printed, especially for this kind of storm discard deck. And on top of that, yeah, I know, it even has another ability that allows you to transform Rona for 5 generic mana and 1 black Phyrexian mana. And she then will transform into a massive 5/5 trample body. And whenever it takes damage, the controller of that source of damage has to exile 1 card from their hand at random. If they exile a land card, we get to put that land onto the battlefield under our control, and if they discard any other card, we get to cast it without paying its mana cost. Yeah, the backside of this card is a really awesome body to just start swinging with, and if your opponents do decide to block it, it will generate you a huge amount of value. Vohar, Vodalian Desecrator. Another 2 mana tap to loot body, and whenever we do discard an instant or sorcery spell to this effect, each opponent will lose 1 life and we get to gain 1 life. Since this list is really big on instants and sorcery spells, this ability will be generating you some nice value over the course of the game. And for 2 mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to give an instant or sorcery spell in our graveyard flashback until the end of turn, which is just a fantastic way to get additional uses out of the spells in this deck. And since you will be casting that card from your graveyard, Green Goblin's cost reduction will apply to the spell. Thought Courier, just the most basic 2-drop creature that you can tap to loot. No special effects on this one. Kurovikan Sorcerer. This creature also allows us to tap him to loot, but if the discarded card was black, we get to draw 2 cards instead of 1, essentially making this into a looter that will give us positive card advantage. It does cost 3 mana instead of the usual 2 mana that these looter creatures cost, but it is just an awesome inclusion in the deck. Ultimate Green Goblin. This creature is basically our commander after eating a ton of chicken and rice and hitting the gym 6 days a week. At the beginning of our upkeep, we have to discard a card and then we get to generate a treasure token. Now in most decks, trading a card in your hand for a simple treasure token isn't that good of an effect. But in this deck, we can actually leverage the card we have to discard for this. And thanks to the Mayhem mechanic, it doesn't even matter that we have to discard the card during our upkeep, because Mayhem says we can recast it from our graveyard for the remainder of the turn. So we can even wait until our second main phase to cast the discarded card. And on top of that, this card also has the Mayhem mechanic itself. So whenever we discard it, we can just cast it from our graveyard by paying 3 mana, which might be really relevant if you don't have access to your commander, that you can still discard it and recast it. And just look at the massive 5 power and 4 toughness creature you get for just the 3 mana. And the last card in this section is Scourge Familiar, a 5 mana 3/2 flying creature that, like Ghostly Pilfer and Psychic Frog, allows us to discard cards on instant speed. But this time we do actually get a huge payoff for discarding cards to this effect. Each time we discard a card, we get to add 1 black mana to our mana pool. And like I already mentioned, we do play this deck as some sort of a storm deck. You will just be setting up value pieces on the board and then going for huge casting turns thanks to Green Goblin. And Scourge Familiar is just perfect for that, because you can just toss cards into the graveyard, which you can then cast for cheaper with Green Goblin, and you can just use the mana that Scourge Familiar generates in the process. So you will be able to use the mana to just chain spells, get a ton of discard and cast from the grave triggers, and then use your win cons to just straight up win the game. Next up, we have the Graveyard Synergies. Green Goblin's cost reduction makes casting cards from your graveyard incredibly efficient, and these cards take that effect even further. They either allow us to cast cards from our graveyard without even using the Mayhem mechanic, or they generate this value whenever we do cast something from our graveyard. Essentially, these cards just turn our graveyard into a second hand, and every card will have the cost reduced by 2 thanks to Green Goblin. Neerdief, Devious Diver. Whenever this 3 mana fishy is on the battlefield, whenever we cast a card from our graveyard, we get to draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And this card is just absolutely ridiculous in this deck, because whenever we cast something with Green Goblin using the Mayhem mechanic, we also get to draw a card on top of that, just giving us a huge amount of card advantage for what we were about to do anyways. And this card's effect doesn't only apply to the Mayhem mechanic, it also applies to other mechanics that allow us to cast from our graveyards, like Flashback or Escape. And the fact that you also get to stack +1/+1 counters on this creature actually turn it into a really scary body over the course of the game. And passively, whenever this creature becomes tapped, target player has to mill cards equal to this creature's power. And obviously you can use this on yourself to get some of your flashback cards in your graveyard, but I would recommend using this effect on your opponents, because if you do mill some of the key value pieces in this deck, we don't really have a way to get them back. And they will be milled and not discarded, so you can't actually use Green Goblin to recast them from your graveyard this way. Secrets of the Dead, a 3 mana enchantment that has the same effect as the previous card. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you get to draw a card. Like I said, this effect will generate you insane amounts of card advantage and will make sure you never run out of cards in your hand. And it will allow you to go through your deck really really fast and just draw into the cards that you need for the given board state. Emmet Selch, a 4-mana wizard with the same passive ability as Green Goblin. Any spell we cast from our graveyard will have its cost reduced by 2 generic mana. Emmet is just a perfect card for when you don't have Green Goblin available to you for any reason, or to just stack with Green Goblin and reduce the cost of anything you cast from your graveyard by a total of 4 mana, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, whenever one or more opponents would lose life, we get to pick one instant or sorcery card in our graveyard and we get to cast it. When we do decide to cast it, we do have to exile the spell afterwards. One thing to note about this ability is that you have to cast the spell whenever this ability triggers. Even though it can be a sorcery spell as a target, you do have to cast it whenever the trigger resolves. It doesn't give flashback until the end of turn or something like that. And this ability is just a nice additional way to get access to more cards in your graveyard. Since we do play a ton of group slug effects in this deck that will ping damage to opponents, and our commander is a flyer with menace, it will be really easy to make opponents actually lose life. Past in Flames, a classic flashback card that probably every Magic player knows. For 4 mana, each instant and sorcery spell in your graveyard will gain flashback until the end of turn, and the flashback cost will be equal to that spell's mana cost, which will be reduced by 2 mana if you have Green Goblin on the battlefield. And as you can imagine, this card just enables some insane storm turns in this deck. Later in the game, if you do have a ton of instants and sorceries in your graveyard and you just cast Past in Flames while you have Green Goblin on the field, you will be able to cast most spells in your graveyard by essentially free, thanks to Green Goblin's cost reduction. This will generate you a huge amount of value by allowing you to discard cards and get a ton of casts from graveyard triggers, which then in turn will trigger cards like Synergies and some of our win cons you will see later in the video. On top of that, this card also has the flashback mechanic itself, meaning if you do discard this card, you can just flashback it on a later turn, which will only cost you 3 mana if you have Green Goblin on the battlefield. Small thing to note is that this card will only give flashback to all the instants and sorceries in your graveyard at the time of casting Past in Flames. If you, for example, discard more spells into your graveyard after you cast the Past in Flames, these cards won't have the flashback mechanic. Only the cards that were already in your graveyard whenever this spell resolves. Will of the Jeskai, a 4 mana spell with 2 options. The first option is essentially some sort of a wheel effect. It will allow every player to discard their hand and draw 5 new cards. And as you can imagine, in this deck, wheels are just absolutely crazy because they will both give us a ton of discard triggers, and whenever you have Green Goblin on the field, all the discarded cards you will be able to cast again from your graveyard by using the Mayhem mechanic. And the costs of any of those spells you discarded will be reduced by 2 generic mana. And the second option on this card is basically the same as Past in Flames, just giving every instant or sorcery spell in your graveyard flashback until the end of turn. Now the best part about this card is that when you cast it and you do control your commander, you actually get to choose both options at once. Meaning you get a wheel effect first, just discarding a ton of cards, and then everything will gain flashback, including the cards you just discarded. Probably one of the best cards in the entire deck and just a fantastic card to start storming off and casting a huge amount of spells. Oscar, Rubbish Reclaimer. This 5 mana creature will have its cost reduced by 1 generic mana for each different mana cost you have in your graveyard. And in this type of deck where we do play a ton of wheel and self-discard effects, Oscar will always cost you just 2 mana. And the second effect is really similar to the Mayhem effect that Green Goblin gives to our cards. Whenever we discard a non-land card, we can cast it from our graveyard. Just keep in mind, like with Emmet, you do have to cast a card whenever this trigger resolves. It doesn't matter if the card is a sorcery, a creature, an enchantment, you do have to cast it whenever you discard it. So you can even discard cards during an opponent's turn and use Oscar to cast them then. Once again, a really good additional backup effect for when you don't have access to Green Goblin, and whenever you do decide to cast a card with Oscar's effect, the cost will also be reduced by 2 generic mana thanks to Green Goblin. And the last card in this section is River Kelpie, a 5 mana 3/3 creature with Persist, meaning whenever this creature would die and it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on itself, it will just return to the battlefield with that -1/-1 counter, essentially forcing your opponents to deal with this creature twice. And just like Synergies and Secrets of the Dead, whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, we get to draw a card. And on top of that, whenever this creature or another creature enters from a graveyard, we also get to draw a card, which in some cases might just give you insane value when you combine this with the Mayhem mechanic. Because let's say you have Green Goblin on the battlefield and you do decide to discard a creature. Then you can just cast it again by using the Mayhem mechanic. You did cast a spell from your graveyard and River Kelpie will draw you a card, and a creature also entered from a graveyard and it will draw you an additional card. And the fact that this card also triggers from things that our opponents reanimate or cast from their graveyard is just fantastic. If you do have some reanimation players in your pot, this is just a fantastic creature to deal with them. If you're enjoying these in-depth deck tech videos and you want to support the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. Not only does it help me keep making these in-depth deck tech videos every single week, but it will also give you early access to any of my deck lists for these type of videos. You will be able to use some awesome Panzer MTG emojis anywhere on YouTube or Discord, and you will also get access to some exclusive chat rooms in the Panzer MTG Discord server. And the Discord honestly has become one of my favorite parts of running this channel. The Discord has been getting really active lately and it's filled with a ton of like-minded Magic players that just love brewing decks. If you ever need help building one of your new decks or you just want to optimize one of your lists, this is the perfect place for you. It's also the place where I got a ton of help for building this specific Green Goblin deck, especially from Jack, who deserves a massive shout out for all the input he gave me for this deck. So if you want to hang out, talk Commander and optimize all your deck lists, the Discord is the perfect place for you. If you want to join and meet our lovely community, the link to the Discord is in the description below the video. Next up, we have the Loot and Wheel cards. These are the cards that allow us to dig really deep into our deck really fast, because they will allow us to discard a huge amount of cards and draw a huge amount of cards. And obviously, when we are able to just discard our entire hand at once, we will get a huge of discard synergy triggers, and we will be able to cast all the discarded cards at a discounted price thanks to Green Goblin. Tolarian Winds, a 2-mana instant speed spell that allows you to discard all cards in your hand and then draw that many cards. And this is one of the most efficient wheel effects ever printed, because it does come at a really low mana cost, which is just perfect to set up for some explosive storm turns, and you can also cast it on instant speed to pull off some funny shenanigans. Brass's Tunnel Grinder, a legendary 3-mana artifact that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards +1. Now usually these type of wheel effects give you negative card advantage because you actually lose a card by playing the wheel. This card solves that problem by drawing you that many cards +1. And the fact that you don't even have to discard your entire hand to this effect, but you can just select the cards you want, is just absolutely ridiculous. If you just want to discard one specific card to recast with Green Goblin, you can just discard 1, draw 2. And later in the game, if you do have some discard synergies on the battlefield, you can just discard your entire hand and get a ton of triggers. And whenever you discard this card with Green Goblin on the battlefield, you can actually cast it for just 1 red mana, which is absolutely insane. At the beginning of our end step, this card will check if we descended this turn. If we did, we get to put a bore counter on this card. Descending basically means that you have to have put a permanent card into your graveyard from anywhere that turn. And since we are a discard deck, this is something we will always be doing. Then whenever you get this trigger and there are 3 bore counters on this card, you get to flip it into its backside, which is a legendary land that taps for 1 red mana. And if you do decide to use that 1 red mana to cast a permanent spell, you also get to discover X. X being the converted mana cost of the spell you just cast. Now the main reason this card is included in the deck is the front side. But later in the game, if you do manage to flip this artifact, it will give you extra mana in the form of a land, and it will give you extra value thanks to the discover mechanic. Frantic Search, an auto inclusion in any Green Goblin deck. For 3 mana, you get an instant speed spell that allows you to draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and then untap 3 lands. Now this is essentially some sort of a free spell, because you will tap 3 lands to actually cast this card and then untap 3 lands again, allowing you to dig deeper into your deck and to get 2 discard triggers. But where this card gets absolutely crazy is when you combine it with Green Goblin's cost reduction, because if you do give give this card Flashback or Mayhem thanks to Green Goblin's ability, you will be able to cast it for 1 blue mana. So you can just tap 3 lands producing you 3 mana, then only use 1 of that mana to actually cast the spell and untap those 3 lands again, essentially accelerating your mana by 2. A perfect card to use during the turns that you are storming off with Green Goblin that will just keep the card draw, the discard triggers and the mana flowing. Laughing Mat, a 3 mana instant speed spell that will require you to discard a card as an additional cost, which as you know by now in this deck is usually an upside. And then whenever this spell resolves, you get to draw 2 cards. Now usually loot spells like this will only cost you 2 mana. This card costs 1 mana more, but in return it does have the flashback mechanic. And this can get really nasty with Green Goblin on the battlefield. Because if you do manage to discard this card from your hand, you can recast it by using the Mayhem effect for just the 1 red mana. And whenever you cast something with Mayhem, the spell doesn't actually get exiled. It will just go to your graveyard, and if you then have Green Goblin on the field, you can use the flashback mechanic for only 2 mana to just cast it again. Once again, giving you a ton of spell cost from graveyard triggers, discard triggers, and allowing you to dig really deep into your deck. Windfall, one of the most popular wheel cards in the entire Commander format. Whenever you play this card, each player will have to discard their hand and everyone will draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way. Now obviously just having a wheel effect allowing you to discard a ton and draw a ton is already really good in this deck, but Windfall does have a ton more uses. Because let's say an opponent has like 6 cards in their hand and you have a discard outlet like a Psychic Frog on the battlefield. You can just discard your entire hand except for the Windfall, get a ton of discard triggers and counters on the Psychic Frog and then cast the Windfall. And you will instantly be able to refill your entire hand. And Windfall also is a really cool card to play against things like a Demonic Tutor, for example. Because if someone tutors a card to their hand, you can just Windfall and they will have to discard their entire hand and their tutor will just be wasted. Winter Night Stories. For 3 mana, you get to draw 3 cards and then you will have to discard 2 cards or 1 creature card. In general, a really solid effect that gives you some flexibility as to how many cards you actually want to discard. But the main reason why it's included in the deck is that because this card has the Harmonize mechanic, meaning you can recast it from your graveyard by paying 5 mana, and on top of that you can also tap any untapped creature you control to reduce the generic mana cost of this spell by that creature's power. Now Green Goblin's cost reduction will already apply to this effect, so you will be able to harmonize for just the 3 mana, but if you for example tap Green Goblin on top of that, you will be able to recast this spell from your graveyard for just the 1 blue mana. And trust me, 1 blue mana to draw 3 cards and then get an additional valuable discard or 2 on top of that is just some really good value. Ancient Excavation, a 4 mana card that will allow you to draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand and then discard that many cards. Now in itself, this is already a superior wheel effect, because you actually get to pick what cards you want to discard and which ones you want to keep in your hand. And another really cool thing about this card is the fact that it has basic land cycling too, meaning whenever this card is in your hand, you can pay 2 generic mana to discard this card and go get a basic land from your deck straight into your hand. Now basic land cycling is already really cool because it just allows you to filter the basic lands out of your deck, reducing the chances you draw lands later in the game, and cycling also discards the card, meaning that this card will get Mayhem whenever you have Green Goblin on the battlefield. So instead of just casting this card regularly for 4 mana, you can first pay 2 generic mana to cycle it, and whenever you have Green Goblin on the battlefield, you can actually cast it for 2 mana by using the Mayhem ability. And thanks to the extra basic land you have in your hand, you will draw 1 additional card and discard 1 additional card. The first time I actually used the cycling and then recasting it with the Mayhem in an actual game of Magic, my opponents were really surprised about this interaction and about what Green Goblin can really do. Big Score, a 4 mana instant speed spell that will require you to discard a card as an additional cost. When it resolves, you get to draw 2 cards and generate 2 treasure tokens. Big Score is just an excellent spell to use during your storm turns, because obviously our commander will allow us to cast this for 2 mana whenever we discard it, and it will give us additional cards, additional discard, and additional mana to just keep our storm turn going. Change of Fortune, a 4 mana wheel that forces us to discard our hand and then allows us to draw 1 card for each card we discarded this turn. Now baseline, this is just a 4 mana wheel spell, but if you do manage to discard some cards before you actually cast this wheel spell, it will give you some insane card draw. Before you cast it, just tap all of your loot creatures or discard your entire hand, but discard to an infinite discard outlet, and you will be drawing like 10 new cards, which is just ridiculous. Decaying Time Loop, another classic 4 mana spell that will allow you to wheel your hand. But on top of that, this card also has the retrace mechanic, meaning you can recast this spell straight from your graveyard by just discarding a land in addition to its other costs. And this is a card you really want to have in your graveyard, because it's essentially a wheel effect that you can just keep casting from your graveyard, because the retrace mechanic doesn't say you have to exile the card after you cast it. It will just stay in your graveyard, and as long as you have lands to discard, you will be able to keep recasting it again. And obviously with Green Goblin on the battlefield, you can do this by just discarding a land and paying 2 mana for its effect. If you combine this card with one of our discard win conditions, you will see in a later section things get out of hand really quickly and you will be able to close out the game really fast. Whispering Madness. This card is essentially a 4 mana windfall. Every player will have to discard their card and then draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way. Now honestly, just including a 4 mana windfall in the deck would be really solid in itself, but this card also has the cipher mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this card, we get to exile it and cipher it on a creature we control. Then whenever the ciphered creature deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to cast a copy of the spell for free. And this is just excellent to cipher onto Green Goblin, because Green Goblin is a flying menace body and really hard to block. And whenever you then connect with him, you will get a free wheel effect for the entire table, giving you 1,000,000 discard triggers, 1,000,000 draw triggers, and it won't even cost you any mana. And since you will have a ton of mana left and a ton of discarded cards, you can just start storming off with Green Goblin. And the last card in this section is Path of the Pyromancer. This 5 mana spell will force you to discard your entire hand and then draw that many cards +1. So when you compare this to the other wheel effects, this card actually goes even in card advantage because it's draw that many +1. Then we get to add 1 red mana to our mana pool equal to the amount of cards we just discarded to this effect. And this is honestly my favorite wheel effect in the entire deck. Just imagine it like this. You have Green Goblin on the battlefield and then you discard like 5 cards from your hand to this effect. All these cards will get Mayhem thanks to Green Goblin, and you will get 5 mana refunded to you, which you can then instantly use to actually cast the cards with the Mayhem effect with their cost reduced by 2 mana thanks to Green Goblin by using this red mana. It honestly is the perfect wheel card for this type of storm deck. Next up, we have the win conditions. These are the cards that actually allow us to close out games by discarding cards and casting cards from our graveyard. They'll do this by either buffing up our creatures or dealing damage to each opponent at once. Ivora, Insatiable Air. Whenever this 2-drop creature enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to create a blood token. A blood token is an artifact which you can invest 1 mana into and sacrifice it to discard a card and draw a card, essentially allowing us to loot. And just having additional sources of self-discard in this deck is always a good thing. And the reason why this card is in the win condition section is because whenever we discard a card, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. As you can imagine, in this deck we will be discarding a ton of cards, either to our discard outlets or to our wheels. And yes, if you do play a Tolarian Winds and you discard 5 cards, this creature will get 5 counters. Now, huge creature bodies are really cute, but what makes Ivora exceptionally great is the fact that this card has Trample, ensuring that you will always be dealing a huge amount of combat damage and that you will be generating additional blood tokens. Shadow of the Goblin, a 2 mana enchantment that was basically made for a Green Goblin deck, because it's both a great discard outlet and it will reward us whenever we cast something from the graveyard. At the beginning of our first main phase, this card makes us loot. Now sadly, it's not a mate trigger and we have to use this effect, but usually it's not a problem in this deck because we can leverage the discard into an actual benefit. And whenever we cast a card from anywhere other than our hand, this enchantment will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And this sort of damage adds up really quickly with the amount of cards we'll be flashbacking and casting with the Mayhem mechanic. Really solid for just a 2 mana enchantment. Fate of the Devoted, a 3 mana enchantment that will allow us to pay 1 generic mana whenever we either cycle or discard a card. When we do, each opponent will lose 2 life and we get to gain 2 life. As I mentioned, most of the win conditions in this deck rely on us pinging damage to each of our opponents at once or draining them out like discard does. And obviously every single turn we will be discarding cards, and you can just use this enchantment to turn any mana you have left over into a table-wide drain. Glinthorn Buccaneer, a 3 mana 2/4 haste creature, and whenever we discard a card while this creature is on the battlefield, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And on top of that, it also has an activated ability. For 2 mana we get to loot, draw a card, discard a card, but we can only use this effect whenever this creature is attacking. A perfect ability later in the game if you do need a couple more extra points of damage or you do need a discard outlet to just activate. And since you can just attack with this creature and activate this ability before blockers are declared, the ability will always resolve. You might lose this creature 2 blocks after the ability did resolve, but you will always be able to generate a huge amount of value with it. Magmakin Artillerist, and this card basically has the same effect as the previous card. Whenever we discard 1 or more cards, this creature will deal that much damage to each opponent. Another card that translates discard triggers into Group Slug table-wide damage. Now pinging 1 damage whenever you discard a card might not seem as much, but just imagine casting some wheel effects when you have this on the battlefield. You will be dealing huge amounts of like 4, 5, 6 damage whenever you cast any of your wheels. And this damage actually does add up, especially if you have multiple Group Slug creatures on the battlefield. And on top of that, this creature also has the cycling ability, which is just insane with Green Goblin. Because whenever we cycle it for 2 mana, we get to draw a new card, replacing itself. It will deal 1 damage to the entire table by its passive effect, and then we can just recast a creature body for the 1 mana from our graveyard by using the Mayhem mechanic. And the total cost of doing all of this is only 3 mana, which is exactly what we would pay as a mana cost for this creature normally. Brawlin, Sky Shark Raider. I swear, this is the last Group Slug creature in this deck. Whenever we discard a card, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Brawlin, and she will also deal 1 damage to each opponent. Like I said, the Group Slug damage really does add up. And on top of that, she also has an activated ability for 1 red mana that will give target shark trample until the end of turn. Do we even have sharks in Magic? Captain Howler, Sea Scourge. For 4 mana, we get a 5/4 shark creature with ward 2 generic mana, pay 2 life. And whenever we discard 1 or more cards, target creature will get +2 power for each card discarded this way. Yeah, this card actually enables us to buff up Green Goblin's power and actually take people out on commander damage. Let's say you have 5 cards in your hand and you are able to play 2 wheel effects. You will be discarding 10 cards and Green Goblin will get a +20 power boost. Since Green Goblin has flying and menace, he is really hard to block and you will just be able to instantly take an opponent out on commander damage. And on top of that, any creature buffed by Captain Howler's ability will also draw you a card whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent. Even if you can only give 1 instance of this buff to Green Goblin or one of your evasive looter creatures, it will still generate you an insane amount of value. Captain Howler is just one of the best discard-centric cards ever printed. Cryptcaller Chariot, a 4 mana vehicle. Whenever we discard 1 or more cards, we get to create that many tapped 2/2 zombie tokens. And what this card essentially does is allowing us to go really wide in this deck and build an army of zombies. Just imagine how crazy the value on this card is when you are able to play some wheel effects. Every time you do, you will be generating about 5 zombies, giving you 10 power and toughness on the board. Now that might not seem as much, but with all the Group Slug damage we will be doing in this deck, your opponents will be at a low life total. And your huge army of zombies will then be able to just take your opponents out of the game. And on top of that, you can also crew this vehicle by using a 2 power creature, like one of the zombies you just generated. And having a 5/5 menace body to swing with is actually a pretty big deal. Kefka, everyone's favorite discard commander before Green Goblin was released. And honestly, I can see why, because the value that Kefka will generate you is absolutely ridiculous. Whenever Kefka enters the battlefield or attacks, every player has to discard a card, and we get to draw a card for each card type discarded this way. Card types being things like land, enchantment, planeswalker, creature, whatever. So first up, Kefka allows us to loot a card ourselves, giving us an additional discard and allowing us to use Green Goblin to cast the card again. And on top of that, depending on what cards your opponents discard, we get to draw additional cards. And usually in my experience, this will draw you an additional 2 to 3 cards, which is just some insane card advantage for just playing or attacking with Kefka. Now that in itself would already be enough to include Kefka in the deck, but it also has an activated ability with a massive cost of 8 generic mana. Now 8 generic mana might seem like a lot, but we do play a ton of acceleration spells in this deck, and it's not actually that hard to get to for us. Whenever we activate it, each opponent has to sacrifice a permanent of their choice, already giving you a slight amount of value, but after that you get to transform Kefka, and it will transform into a massive 5/7 creature with one of the most insane abilities on any card ever printed. Whenever an opponent loses life during our turn, we get to draw that many cards, and this triggers from anything. If you just swing with a creature and deal combat damage, you will get to draw that many cards. If you have a group slug creature on the battlefield and you deal 1 damage to each opponent, you will be drawing 3 cards. And if you drain the table with Fate of the Devoted, you will also get to draw 6 cards of that. Even though it does come at a really high mana cost of casting Kefka and then transforming it, it is a really insane effect. And we can also use the backside of Kefka to actually create an infinite combo in this deck. And for this infinite loop to happen, you will only need 3 things. You will need one of the group slug creatures on the battlefield that will deal 1 damage to every opponent whenever you discard. You will need a transformed Kefka on the battlefield, and you will need more than 7 cards in your hand at the beginning of your end step. And to then create the infinite loop, you just have to end your turn and go to your cleanup step. The cleanup step is a step after the end step where it will check if you have 7 or more cards in your hand, and then you will have to discard down to hand size. So let's say you have 8 cards in hand and you will have to discard 1 card. This will cause the group slug creature to trigger and deal 1 damage to each opponent. This will then in turn trigger Kefka, and we will get to draw 3 new cards. Then after all players pass priority to you, you will still be in your cleanup step, and you will get to check if you have 7 or more cards in your hand again. You will now have 10 cards in your hand and you will have to discard 3 cards. You discard these cards, the group slugger will trigger and Kefka will trigger again. And this will create an infinite loop because you will just keep drawing cards and having more than 7 cards in your hand, forcing you to discard and forcing the group slugger to deal damage. I know it's pretty hard to get to this combo because transforming Kefka does require a huge mana investment, but Kefka would be included in the deck anyways outside of the combo, and since this is a slower deck, you will actually be able to get to that amount of mana you need for this to happen. And the last card in this section is Flaming Tyrannosaurus, a massive 7/7 5/5 dinosaur creature. And whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it will deal 3 damage to any target, essentially giving you a free lightning bolt. As I already explained in this video, you will be casting a ton of cards from places that aren't your hand, be it thanks to the Mayhem mechanic of Green Goblin or by just flashbacking cards. And you can just use the free lightning bolt effect to take out some value creatures on the board or to just start pinging down players' life totals. And on top of that, you will also get a growing menace creature body that you will be able to swing with at opponents. It has another passive ability that is just perfect with the fact that this creature will grow its power over the course of the game. Whenever this creature dies, it will deal damage to each opponent equal to its power. Now at some points your opponents will have to deal with the Flaming Tyrannosaurus because it will generate you a huge amount of value, and when they do decide to remove it, will take a huge chunk of life from their life totals. Flaming Tyrannosaurus is a really awesome card, and whenever you discard it, you will be able to cast it for the low cost of 5 mana thanks to Green Goblin. Next up, we have the acceleration section. Since this is a really mana hungry deck, we really need every single point of mana we can get. This section is all about accelerating our mana so that we can use it to storm off on a later turn. I decided to include a huge amount of mana rocks in this deck, and that's not just for efficiency, but because they scale really well with Green Goblin's ability. I'll be explaining why later in the section. Soul Ring. Yeah, what should I even say at this point? It's one of the most efficient mana rocks ever printed, and we do play some cards in the deck that have a huge generic mana cost, so we will always have a use for the mana it produces. We also play 6 2-mana rocks in this deck. An Arcane Signet, a Felwar Stone, an EZ Signet, and 3 Talismans. Now I know what you're thinking, 6 mana rocks really is overkill, my dude. But hear me out. Whenever you have Green Goblin on the battlefield and you discard any 2-mana rock, you will actually be able to cast it for free from your graveyard. Since these rocks only have generic mana in their cost will be reduced to 0 mana. So let's say you have Goblin on the field, you have 2 mana rocks in your hand and you play a wheel spell. You can then just play these 2 mana rocks and you will instantly have access to the mana they produce, allowing you to storm into further spells. The synergy between Green Goblin and mana rocks is absolutely insane. If you playtest this deck a couple of times, you will know what I'm talking about. Vial of Galadriel, a 3-mana mana rock that will give you 1 mana of any color. And on top of that, whenever you would draw a card and you have no cards in your hand, you get to draw 2 cards instead. And since this effect is a replacement effect, it is really good with all of the wheel cards we play in this deck. Because let's say you have a Vial of Galadriel on the field and you then cast a Tolarian Winds. You will have to discard your hand and then draw that many new cards. But since you had 0 cards in your hand at the moment you drew the cards, you will get to draw that many plus 1. So this card will essentially allow all your wheel spells to draw you an additional card. And on top of that, you can also do some really weird shenanigans with it, like before you go to your draw step in your upkeep, you can just discard your entire hand to a Psychic Frog. You can cast the cards later with Green Goblin anyways, and instead of drawing just 1 card in your draw step, you will get to draw 2 cards instead. Pretty good value for a 3-mana rock. Alright, quick break because we just hit 10,000 subscribers on this channel. And to this day, this number still feels unreal to me. When I started this channel with that first Necrogloom video, I never expected it to grow into a community this passionate about Magic. So to celebrate this huge milestone, I will be giving something back. I will be giving away 2 foil full art copies of Green Goblin. Now, due to some shipping delays, I don't actually have the cards yet, so I can't physically show you to them in this video, but trust me, it is an absolutely beautiful card. To enter the giveaway, you only have to do 2 things. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment below this video telling me which deck from the channel is your favorite and what made it stand out to you. And that's it. That's all you have to do. I will be picking 2 winners based on my personal favorite comments, so make sure to be creative. I will be announcing the winners in the video that will drop in 2 weeks from now, so make sure you stay tuned. And seriously, thank you all again for helping me hit this huge milestone in my life. You've turned what started as a small hobby project into something I'm truly proud of. Good luck with the giveaway, and thank you all for being a part of this awesome journey. Back to Magic now. Next up, we have the support cards. These are the synergy pieces that tie the whole deck together and amplify what we already want to do in this deck but didn't fit into any other category. Shadow of the Grave, a 2-mana instant speed spell that will allow us to return each card we discarded this turn to our hand. And obviously the value this card will generate you is crazy. Just imagine activating 2 of your loot creatures, then playing a wheel and having discarded a total of 8 cards this turn. You can then just follow up with a simple 2-mana spell and return those 8 discarded cards to your hand. It's such a crazy card and I didn't even know it existed before making this video. Boggart Trawler, a 3-mana creature that will exile target graveyard whenever it enters the battlefield. Nowadays, in modern day Magic, almost any deck relies on using their graveyard. Be it reanimation players, landfall players, even some spellslinger players that rely on flashback flashbacking spells in their graveyard. This simple 3-drop creature can shut down someone's entire game plan, and you should include graveyard hate in any deck that you build nowadays. And if you don't need to exile someone's graveyard, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for black mana and even enters untapped for the low cost of 3 life. As I mentioned in all my videos, there really is no downside to including these MDFC land cards in your decks. Monument to Endurance, a card you should include in any discard deck that you build. It's a 3 mana artifact that allows you to pick 1 out of 3 options that hasn't been chosen this turn whenever you discard a card. The first option allows you to draw a card, giving you some excellent card advantage whenever you discard. The second option will give you a treasure token, accelerating your mana or giving you more mana for when you do decide to storm off with Green Goblin. And the third option will make every opponent lose 3 life, resulting in a total of 9 life loss for just discarding a card. Yeah, this card just does it all. Especially when you are able to discard cards on instant speed, you can even start getting multiple triggers during opponent's turns. Just pick the 3 options during your turn, 3 during an opponent's turn, and you will be able to get more uses out of this card during a turn cycle. And whenever you have Green Goblin on the battlefield and you discard Monument to Endurance, you can actually cast it for the low cost of 1 generic mana. Riel, the Everwise, a classic EZ discard commander. It's a 3 mana human wizard that will get +1 power for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. And like I mentioned, we are a spell heavy deck, so Riel will always be at a huge amount of power. But the real reason why she's included in the deck is her passive ability. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time in a turn, you get to draw that many cards. And obviously this effect is just insane, because now your looting creatures will give you positive card advantage, or whenever you play a wheel, let's say discarding 5, drawing 5, you will now get to discard 5 and actually draw 10 cards, essentially just doubling up on their value. And if you are able to discard cards on instant speed, you can essentially sort of bypass the once per turn mechanic. You can play a wheel during your turn, get Riel's effect, tap a looter during an opponent's turn, get Riel's effect. You get the point. Riel is just an insane value card in any sort of discard deck. Archfiend of Ifnir, my favorite card in the entire deck. For 5 mana, you get a creature that will, whenever you discard or cycle a card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. And this is a one-sided effect. It will only affect your opponent's boards. And as you can imagine, with the amount of cards that we will be cycling and discarding in this deck, it's just a repeatable board wipe that will even take out the most massive creatures on the board. And on top of that, this card also has the cycling ability itself, making it a really cool card to use with Green Goblin. Because you can just cycle this away for 2 mana, draw a new card, and then you can recast it from your graveyard for 3 mana, which will total in a cost of 5 mana, which is the cost you would normally pay for this creature. But on top of that, you also cycled it and it replaced itself by drawing you a card. From the Catacombs, a 5 mana sorcery speed spell that will allow you to reanimate a creature from any graveyard. It will enter with a corpse counter, meaning if the creature would die, it gets exiled instead. And we also get to take the initiative, meaning we get to venture into the Undercity dungeon. Now, the initiative isn't the reason why this card is included in the deck, but venturing into the Undercity will allow you to get a basic land from your deck straight into your hand, giving you an additional card to discard or just filtering basics from your deck. Now, we're not a reanimation deck by any means, but we do play some valuable creatures that you can use this card to just reanimate them later in the game. You can use it on a Flaming Tyrannosaurus, a Kefka, one of your win condition creatures, or just any creature that ended up in your graveyard that you have no way of returning it to the battlefield. Or in some games, if your opponents do have a huge creature in their graveyard, you can even use this card to reanimate the creature under your control. Now, the main reason why this card is included in the deck is because it has the escape mechanic, meaning we can cast it from our graveyard for 5 mana and exiling 5 other cards. And obviously, Green Goblin reduces the cost of this effect to 3 mana. And escaping a card won't even exile this card from our graveyard, so we can keep using it again and again again, for as long as we can keep paying the mana cost, and exiling 5 cards from our graveyard. But thanks to all our wheel effects, our graveyard will always be filled with a huge amount of cards to exile. Increasing Ambition. This card is essentially a 5 mana demonic tutor, allowing us to search our library for a card and put it straight into our hand. But where this card gets really insane is that whenever you cast this card from your graveyard, you get to search your library for 2 cards and put those into your hand. Now this card was made with its own flashback mechanic in mind, which cost 8 mana, which isn't that great of a deal paying 8 mana to just tutor 2 cards. But if you can discard this card from your hand and recast it by using Green Goblin for only 3 mana, you get to tutor 2 cards, which is just absolutely insane value. And tutors will always be really great in Commander because you can just use them to tutor up the cards you need at the given board state. You can tutor up removal spells, counter magic, win conditions, board wipes, or even your game winning combos. And after you cast this card for its Mayhem cost, it will still go to your graveyard, and with Green Goblin on the battlefield, you can actually use it again for 6 mana by flashbacking it, allowing you to tutor up even more cards and just shape your hand as you please. Lorien Revealed, a 5 mana sorcery speed spell that will allow you to draw 3 cards. Now in itself, that is already pretty okay value. But this card also has basic land cycling 1, meaning you can pay 1 generic mana to discard this card, draw a new card, and go search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand. And once again, these cycling cards are just absolutely insane with Green Goblin, because you can just cycle this away for 1 mana, it will replace itself by drawing you a card, you will get to fetch a basic land, and then you can cast it with Green Goblin for just the 3 mana and draw an additional 3 cards, essentially paying 4 mana to draw 4 cards and get a basic land from your deck. And the last card in this section is Step Through, a 5 mana sorcery speed spell that will allow us to bounce 2 creatures. Now I know this is absolutely horrible value, but this card has Wizard Cycling 2, meaning you can pay 2 generic mana, discard this card, and tutor up any wizard card from your deck to your hand. And in this deck we do play a total of 8 wizards. Some of our loot engines are wizards, Emmet is a wizard, and the card you will be tutoring up most with this effect will be Kefka, since that is by far the best wizard in the entire deck. And once again, whenever you use the cycle ability, thanks to Green Goblin, you will still be able to actually use the bounce effect for just 3 mana, allowing you to bounce 2 creatures and tutor up a wizard for 5 mana, which honestly isn't the worst deal. Next up, we have the protection and interaction section. All the value I've just been talking about means absolutely nothing when we can't protect our own game plan or disrupt our opponent's game plan. And since we are in Grixis colors, we have access to really efficient removal spells, counter magic, and board wipes. An offer you can't refuse. The 1 mana counter spell I include in every single deck that I build because it's just that efficient. It will counter any non-creature spell on the stack, and the controller of the counter spell will get 2 treasure tokens in return. Now obviously you won't be using this card to counter a Farseek, but if you are about to storm off with Green Goblin and an opponent is using a removal spell on him, you can just leave the 1 blue mana open, give them 2 useless treasure tokens, and your game plan will be fine and you will be able to win the game. Bone Shards, a 1 mana sorcery speed spell that will destroy target creature or planeswalker. But as an additional cost to this spell, we do have to discard a card or sacrifice a creature. Now for most decks, Bone Shards is a horrible card, but the fact that we do have to discard a card for this effect is actually a benefit to us in this deck because we can recast a discarded card anyways thanks to Green Goblin. So both removal spell and an extra discard trigger. Slip Out the Back. For 1 mana, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and then it phases out. And phasing out basically means that creature doesn't exist until its controller's next turn. And you can use this both offensively or defensively. Let's say you're playing against a Krenko player and he's about to tap Krenko to create 10 million goblins and is about to take everyone out of the game with that. You can just slip out the back, phase out the Krenko, and he won't be a threat to you anymore, since he just won't exist until the next turn. Perfect way to disrupt any sort of combo. Or whenever an opponent is playing spot removal or a board wipe targeting Green Goblin, you can just make him phase out and he will be fine until your next turn. Since in this deck we play most things during our own turn, it actually doesn't matter that Green Goblin doesn't exist during our opponent's turns, and he's actually safe until it's our turn again. Bitter Triumph, a 2 mana instant speed spell that will destroy target creature or planeswalker. And as an additional cost to casting this, we have to either discard a card or pay 3 life. Now this card is really similar to Bone bone shards. But it does have a couple of subtle differences. First up, this card can be cast on instant speed, which is actually a really big deal for a spot removal spell. And in some specific scenarios, we really don't want to be discarding cards. And instead of discarding, we can then just pay the 3 life to remove something. Amphibian Downpour, one of the most underrated cards in the entire format in my opinion. For 3 mana, you get an enchantment that has both flash and the storm mechanic. Thanks to the storm mechanic, whenever you cast a spell, you get to copy it for each other spell that has been cast this turn. And it doesn't only count the spells you cast, it also casts the spells that your opponents cast. And the original and all the copies it creates will be enchantments that attach to a creature, and the creature will have 1 power, 1 toughness, and lose all abilities. And since these are enchantments, they just stick to the creature until the creature is removed. And turning a creature into a useless 1/1 without abilities is one of the most annoying things you can do to someone's commander, because the commander won't go to the graveyard, it won't get exiled, and it will just be on the battlefield as a useless 1/1. If your opponents have no way to sacrifice their commanders, it will just be stuck on the battlefield and they won't be able to recast it. And since we are some sort of a storm deck and we will be casting a ton of spells every single turn, you will be able to get to huge storm counts and actually deal with almost any problematic creature on the board when you cast this. Circular Logic, a 3 mana instant speed spell that will counter any spell on the stack unless the controller of that spell pays 1 generic mana for each card in our graveyard. Like I explained before in the video, our graveyard will always be filled by a huge number of cards. So this card is just essentially a 3 mana counter spell. But the reason why it's included in the deck is because it has the madness mechanic, meaning whenever you discard this card, you can cast it the moment you discard it for just 1 blue mana. So if you do think you need a counter spell because an opponent is about to cast a big spell or a board wipe or something, you can just leave one of your looter creatures and 1 blue mana untapped. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you can just discard this on instant speed, cast it for its madness cost, and the spell will be countered for the low cost of 1 mana. And a really similar card is Countervailing Winds. Same effect, for 3 mana you get to counter target spell unless the controller pays mana equal to the cards in our graveyard. But instead of the madness mechanic, this card has the cycling mechanic. And this is really cool when you combine it with Green Goblin. Because if someone casts a spell you really want to counter, you can just pay 2 mana, cycle this card, draw a new card. It will be discarded and you will be able to use the Mayhem effect to recast this and counter a spell for just 1 mana. Making it into a 3 mana card that says counter target spell and draw a card, which honestly is a pretty good counter spell. Withering Torment, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows us to destroy target enchantment or creature. Since nowadays there are a ton of really strong enchantments being played like a Smothering Tide, a Rhystic Study, and Aura Shards, we do need ways in this deck to deal with actual enchantments. And since we are in Grixis colors, we don't really have that many cards that deal with enchantments, so that's the reason why I decided to include a Withering Torment. And the last card in this section is a Blasphemous Act. For 9 mana you get a sorcery speed spell that will deal 13 damage to each creature on the battlefield. But the cost of this card is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature that is actually on the battlefield, which is just fantastic because you will only need a board wipe when the board is swarmed with creatures. And there isn't any board wipe that's more efficient than this. Dealing 13 damage to every creature on the board for just 1 red mana is the best deal you'll ever get. Since we are a slower and more mid-rangey deck, we do need board wipes like this to actually buy us time to get to the late game. Next up we have the lands. The mana base is obviously built respecting the €100 budget, but honestly you don't need anything more to make the deck run. I also decided to include a couple of utility lands in the deck, so I'll start by going over those. Ash Barrens, a really simple land that has basic land cycling, which is a fantastic way to get additional discard triggers and filter basic lands from your deck. It's just a nice little land to get that 1 additional discard trigger, and if you really need to play on curve and you really need a land, it's just a land that doesn't even enter tapped. Cephalid Coliseum. For 1 blue mana and tapping this land, you get to draw 3 cards and then discard 3 cards. It does have a threshold mechanic, so you will need at least 7 cards in your graveyard to use this effect. And it's a land that just allows you to dig really deep into your deck and give you a huge amount of discard triggers, which will trigger your group's local win condition cards and which will allow you to discard cards and just mayhem Mayhem them in again with Green Goblin. Desolate Lighthouse. For 3 mana and tapping this land, you get to loot. An additional way to start discarding cards on a land for when you don't have any other discard outlets available to you. Really similar card, Gaia Reach Sanitarium. For 2 mana and tapping it, every player gets to draw a card and then has to discard a card. It's way more efficient than Desolate Lighthouse, but your opponents will also get this effect and you will actually be giving them some card advantage. So just be warned, do use this effect sparingly. Oscorp Industries. A new Grixis land we got in the Spider-Man set and is just made for Norman. It's a land that enters the battlefield tapped, but it also has the Mayhem mechanic, meaning whenever we discard this land, we can just play it from our graveyard that turn. Do keep in mind though, normal timing rules do apply to this card, so if you already drop the land this turn, you won't be able to play this anymore. Only one normal land can be played every single one of your turns. That being said, it's still a really awesome land to just pitch to any of your looter creatures and essentially go positive in card value by just playing this from your graveyard as a land for the turn. Spymaster's Vault. For 1 black mana and tapping it, target creature we control gets to connive X. X being the number of creatures that die this turn. The amount of discard you can get of this land can be absolutely crazy. Let's say you just cast a Blasphemous Act and you destroy 20 creature tokens on the board. Whenever you then activate this land, you will get to connive 20, meaning you get to draw 20 cards and then discard 20 cards, which will result in a game win if you have any of your win condition group sluggers on the battlefield. And you don't even have to be casting the board wipe yourself. When your opponents are swinging at each other and their creatures are dying, you will be able to use this effect, generating you a huge amount of card draw and a huge amount of discard triggers. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we play 3 fast lands, 3 filter lands, 3 check lands, 3 pain lands, 3 scry lands, 2 of the cycle lands, an exotic orchid, a horizon land, a command tower, a seating landscape, and for basics we play 4 islands, 3 mountains, and 1 swamp. And last up, we have the upgrade section. If you've tested this deck and you've fallen in love with it, which honestly is pretty likely, there's some room to even take it further. The first and most obvious thing you can do is just upgrade the mana base. Just replace some of the lands with fetch lands, shock lands, and some of the bond lands, and your color fixing will be way smoother, but it does come at quite a hefty price to upgrade the entire mana base. And aside from the mana base, I will be going over some cards that didn't fit the €100 budget that you can totally use to upgrade the deck. At the end of the upgrade section, I will also flash into the screen which card swaps you should make for the upgrades. Kitsa, Otterball Elite. Another 2 mana, tap to loot creature, but this one has an insane amount of abilities. It has Vigilance, meaning you can swing with it and then tap it to loot afterwards. It has Prowess, meaning it will get +1/+1 until the end of turn whenever you cast a non-creature spell, which we will be doing a ton in this deck. And for 2 mana and tapping Kitsa, we get to copy target instant or sorcery spell we control. But we can only activate it when Kitsa is at 3 power. This is obviously one of the best looter creatures there is. You will easily be able to get it to a huge amount of power and use the copy ability. And as you've seen, we do run a ton of instants and sorceries, and it will provide you with some insane value. Early in the game, it will act as a simple 2-drop looter, and later in the game, it will just win you games. Fun fact, otters are my favorite animals. Fierce Guardianship. For 3 mana, we get to counter any non-creature spell. And if we control our commander, we can cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Now, as I mentioned in all my videos, all the cards you can cast for 0 mana when you control your commander are absolutely broken and should be banned in the format in my opinion. That being said, this card is just way too good not to include in the deck, because this deck really needs your commander to be on the battlefield to actually win the game. And a card like Fierce Guardianship is just a perfect protection card, countering any board wipes or spot removal. You don't even have to have mana open to start protecting your commander, which is absolutely insane. Mythical Code. A 3 mana artifact with flash and indestructible. Whenever Mythical Code enters a battlefield, we get to equip it to target legendary creature we control. And the equipped creature will get indestructible for as long as this is equipped to it. Now, Mythical Code is a really good card in general. Just being able to flash it in for 3 mana and protect any of your legendary creatures is already really good. But the synergy this card card has with Green Goblin is just crazy, because you can just pass the turn with 1 mana and one of your looter creatures untapped, and whenever an opponent is trying to mess with Green Goblin, you can just tap the looter, discard Mythical Code, and recast it instantly for 1 generic mana. To auto-equip 2 Green Goblin and you will get indestructible on instant speed. And trust me, your opponents won't see this coming. Toxic Deluge. This card is, in my opinion, the best board wipe ever printed. And that is because of the fact that it will give -X and even deal with indestructible creatures. Now it does come at a huge life cost, but life is a resource anyways. And Toxic Deluge would be the replacement for Blasphemous Act in this deck. If for some reason you don't like Toxic Deluge or paying a huge amount of life, you can just run the Blasphemous Act. But if you do play in a pot with a ton of indestructible creatures, Toxic Deluge really is an all-star card. Vivi Ornithier. I think from now on, every deck that is in blue and red that I make, Vivi will be in the upgrade section, unless they actually turn it into a game changer or decide to ban it. All jokes aside, Vivi is obviously a really strong card and she is a perfect fit for this type of deck. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Vivi and she will ping 1 damage to the entire table, which is just perfect synergy with all of the group slug effects we are already playing. During our turn, we can just activate Vivi for 0 mana and add any combination of blue and red mana to our mana pool equal to the power of Vivi. I don't know what it is, but every time I read Vivi's abilities again, I just can't imagine this is an actual real card. Now obviously, since we are some sort of a storm deck, we will be able to stack a huge amount of counters and deal a huge amount of damage with Vivi, which she will then turn into mana and allow us to cast even more spells. Relic of Sauron, a 4 mana rock that will add 2 mana in Grixis colors to our mana pool. And for 3 mana and tapping this card, we also get to draw 2 cards and discard 1 card. So a really efficient mana rock that we can use later in the game to discard and draw additional cards and get a ton of triggers from that. And like I mentioned, mana rocks are just crazy with Green Goblin, because if you discard this card, you can just recast it for 2 and you will instantly be able to generate you 2 new mana. Honestly, this card should have been included in the main deck, but for some reason this is a pretty expensive mana rock and I really couldn't fit it into the €100 budget. And the last but certainly not the least is Bone Miser, a 5 mana zombie wizard that has arguably the best payoffs for a discard deck. And it has 3 simple abilities that trigger whenever you discard a specific card. When you discard a creature card, you get to create a 2/2 zombie token. When you discard a land card, you get to add 2 black mana to your mana pool. And whenever you discard any other card, you get to draw a card. Yeah, this thing is really good in a discard deck. Just imagine having a Bone Miser on the field and then casting a wheel effect, discarding 5 and drawing 5 new cards. It will give you some black mana in the process, allowing you to cast even more spells after that, maybe even more wheels. You will get a small army of zombie tokens and you will get to draw a huge amount of cards. Once again, Bone Miser should have really been included in the main deck of this list, but for some reason it is a really expensive card. And I really blame Hashaton for that fact, because Bone Miser just shot up in price whenever Hashaton was revealed. I'll be flashing into the screen a list of card swaps to make for these upgrades, so make sure to pause the video if you're interested in that. And that's it for my in-depth Green Goblin deck tech. This deck is easily one of the most intricate decks I've ever built on the channel. Every turn feels like a puzzle where you really have to think smart about sequencing and in what order that you play cards. But honestly, I really love piloting those kinds of decks. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, and of course, don't forget to enter the giveaway by commenting which deck on the channel you like most and telling me why. And I really wish I could thank every single one of you personally for helping me reach this huge milestone in my life. Seriously, this journey has just been incredible for me. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.